Mercedes has scored their first podium of the season, but it did not go without any drama throughout the entire weekend in Canada. After the last safety car at the 55th lap of the race, many believed that Hamilton was sabotaged to pit on fresh hard tyres while having just 10-lap-old medium tyres that could have secured his podium finish. But even before that, the fact that he was constantly in the top 3 before Saturday but ended up P7 in Q3 goes to show that Mercedes might have switched the preference mode to on in their team. With this in mind, is Russell the preferred driver in Mercedes? And more importantly, did Mercedes start to sabotage Hamilton? It goes without saying that Mercedes have had one of the most rollercoaster seasons ever since they entered Formula 1. And the fact that they went from finishing below P6 to scoring a pole position and a podium is definitely an encouraging path for the Silver Arrows. However, the intra-team drama is not stopping, and Hamilton's statements have raised quite a bit of questions among the F1 paddock about whether or not the Brackley-based squad started to sabotage the 7-time world champion. The current qualifying head-to-head is one of the worst on the grid, with Russell out-qualifying his teammate 8-1, and the fact that it was Hamilton who had more pace over one lap compared to his teammate throughout the entire weekend, with the exception of Q3's last lap, goes to show that there's a lot to think about when it comes to Mercedes' preferences. When talking about the overall Montreal weekend, despite being close to a podium and climbing 3 positions from P7 to P4, Hamilton was still negatively oriented towards himself, as he added, "It was a pretty disastrous afternoon in the qualification, and today the race was shocking. So I can't say that I'm happy with it. I would say that I'm happy that we are progressing, and that is a positive I take from this weekend." George was on a much quicker tyre at the end. He was on the mediums and I was on the hards. I did not know he was going to the mediums, or I would have stayed out. This is also one of the big things that happened in Mercedes that raised some questions. Before entering the pit lane on lap 55, Hamilton asked whether the graining on his 10-lap-old medium tyres was huge, to which Bonner replied that the team feels that they would be much better on a new compound on hard tyres. Russell has also entered the pits ahead of Hamilton, putting on a fresh set of medium tyres, and only after the young Brit made a mistake in trying to pass Piastri was Hamilton able to get through and climb to P3 due to the fact that Piastri's tyres were much older. But as Russell started to bring the tyres up to heat, it was inevitable that he and his teammate would get into a head-to-head battle, one that George was able to solve without greater trouble due to the softer compound tyres that allowed him to brake later at the last pair of corners in the race. Even before all of this happened, Hamilton raised his concerns about the behaviour of the car and how it's quite different when it matters the most. And to only add more fire to the flame, the 7-time world champion said that he does not believe that he will be able to out-qualify Russell in the remainder of 2024, and is not happy that he's always the first one that goes out of the garage on the Saturday. It's also worth mentioning that both of the cars had the upgraded front wings in Montreal, meaning that Russell did not have that competitive edge over his teammate like he did back in Monaco. And still, the qualifying gap was much bigger than we could have originally anticipated, based on how the entire weekend went up until that point. When talking about the sudden slump in performance in Montreal, Hamilton went on to say, "Saturdays usually go like this, so I can't say I'm surprised. We did not change anything on the car, but I was half a second slower. The grip was just not there, and I don't know where it went. I was just suddenly gone. The car was feeling great all weekend, and as soon as we got to qualifying, that kind of vanished for me. The grip just disappears for me. P3, I had plenty of pace in me, and then I got to qualifying and the tyres wouldn't work. Again, nothing had changed on the car." The same view was reflected by Toto Wolff, who had nothing else to say but wonder as to where the sudden performance of Hamilton went. One that could have played a massive role in where he finished, considering the fact that Mercedes was quite competitive throughout the race as well. When talking about this, Wolff said, "It looked like both of our cars were beating everyone, but in the end it became so tight, also for George, and then Lewis couldn't get a good lap time. We do not know why it didn't work out for him in the end. The tyre temperatures were in a good window, Lewis put in some strong laps today, it just somehow did not come together in the end. That is why the result is a bit bittersweet." This is quite interesting because it comes in a period in which Mercedes seems to be catching up to the front of the grid, and for the first time in 2024 they were competitive for podiums and pole positions. This is a massive step for the Brackley-based squad, which did enter the last Grand Prix with cautious optimism when it comes to competing up front, and according to Russell, Even a race win was possible had it not been for some mistakes that he took full responsibility for. While this is quite a far-fetched scenario and something that we can only talk about in terms of what if, it's certain that Mercedes is now happier with where the car is. But is Lewis a happy driver in Mercedes? Whether or not the performance of the W15 will improve, there is a certain note that we should not forget. Hamilton won't be there from 2025 onwards. The Ferrari-bound 7-time world champion's decision is something that shocked the entire F1 world. But even Hamilton himself has understood that decisions like this from the team were inevitable. After all, Mercedes needs to think about their future, and if they somehow start finding a lot of performance in their car, the last thing that they would want to do is see that knowledge being handed to Hamilton's hands in the name of trust. Even before his decision to leave Mercedes was made, there were signs that Hamilton's likeness in the team had dropped a lot, and a clear one was the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix. When Hamilton climbed on the podium, there was no one from Mercedes to celebrate with him, and the fact that the Ferrari crew celebrated with one of their fiercest rivals went on to say a lot. The picture was quite different in Montreal, however, and while the situation was a lot different due to Russell's last lap crash, it had nothing to do with Hamilton's exceptional P3 result with quite a struggling car. With all of this in mind, it would be interesting to see whether Hamilton's satisfaction with the team will continue to decline, and if so, what would be the consequence? It's very likely that Hamilton will continue to serve the role as the wingman in Mercedes, and, at least in qualifying, where the 7-time world champion said himself that he does not expect a lot of change in this regard. Furthermore, Mercedes is already working on a replacement for Lewis, and Wolff said it out loud and clear. All eyes are put on Antonelli. But the fact that he's so young and can burn out from all the hype that revolves around him is a real threat that might force Mercedes to sign a veteran for at least 1 year before Antonelli gets accommodated in the Silver Arrow seat. On the other hand, everything looks promising for Russell, as the only factor he pointed towards when it comes to the poor performance of his team is the human errors from his side. When talking about this in a greater extent, he said, "We had the pace, Max was very strong at the points in the race, but when we put the mediums on at the end, we were really fast. The mistake with Piastri when I tried to overtake him and I lost a position to Lewis cost me at least P2. Maybe we could have fought with Max later on in the race. We will have to take all the positives from this weekend, the first pole position and the first podium of the year." Obviously, the intra-team drama won't end anytime soon, and whether we like it or not, we will receive quite a lot of statements from Hamilton when it comes to the performance of the car. However, this time the 7-time world champion has the arguments to back it up, and the sudden loss of performance in qualifying, as well as some questionable decisions during the race, are definitely worth investigating more. With this in mind, do you think that Mercedes is sabotaging Hamilton? And more importantly, do you think that Russell is getting preferential treatment this early in the season, when the team is struggling to understand the performance of their car? Let us know in the comments below.